First, it's a little bit more of a presentation, but it's also just a kind of a way into our conversation today. And I'm really happy to be here in community. I kind of pulled myself away from the park on a sunny day here in New York. I feel like I've just been looking at digital boxes for 7 months, and I was kind of bummed. But I realized that I'm going to be in community today, and that over these past several weeks, this community of USI is just really distinguished in being comprised of people who, I guess, really retain their wonder about the world. And I just wanted to acknowledge that. And it's so much a result of our director, Tatiana Morin, and my colleagues, George and Igor and Margaret and Meg and Ed and Chino and Rich and Paul. So these people who I consider friends. So just wanted to say that. So RL emailed me at the end of the summer and said that they've been looking at my portfolio and were curious about a project that I did a couple of years ago called Sharp Song Crop Over. And so we had a conversation about it, and they asked me if I'd unpack the production experience for this conversation, which seemed pretty straightforward and kind of an unexpected opportunity to revisit what was a really special project. And it turned out to be kind of a little bit harder than I thought. And I can't actually, let me see if I can see myself also here. I don't know. Okay, so this is Simone Weil. She's a philosopher and a kind of political thinker that I turn to often for different frames. And I had a kind of oppositional frame and kind of thinking about this project that I'm going to present. And she gave me space to think about it a different way. And my copy has carrots on it, but the title is the same, The Need for Roots. And it's a chapter in the second part called Uprootedness. And I just want to open with some words from her. To be rooted is perhaps the most important and least recognized need of the human soul. It is one of the hardest to define. A human being has roots by virtue of his real, active, and natural participation in the life of a community, which preserves in living shape certain particular treasures of the past and certain particular expectations for the future. And that frame of rootedness is more helpful than what I was going to talk about, which was narrative control and kind of ownership of the narrative at this place called Sylvester Manor, which I think kind of brings to mind sort of empire building and dominance, but in a project that was really about cultural production, where I was really negotiating space in a complex way. It was about shared rootedness, and that frame kind of makes more sense to me from a human perspective. And as I was thinking about this project, which is now 5 or 6 years old, really the majority of this really hard work of deep change is incremental, and it's incomplete, and it's quiet, it's kind of ephemeral, it's local, it's relational, and it's done by and with people who kind of hold contradictions. And that really helped me get through this, because at first I was like, oh, I'll pick this project, but it wasn't realized in a way that I had wanted it to be. And that is all kind of okay. I was able to see that. Just land on this for a bit, on rootedness of this family. The title Sharp Song Crop Over was the title of a site-specific installation that I designed for Sylvester Manor, which is a former provisioning plantation on Shelter Island, which is an 8,000-acre island at the tip of eastern Long Island here in New York, though the manor parcel is now about 250 acres. And Sylvester Manor became a fully independent nonprofit educational farm, art center, and music venue in July 2014, after being owned by a single family for over 15 generations since 1620. And I met Bennett, who's down here at the bottom, around 2005, when the property was just changing hands. And Bennett had just finished college, and my work has involved sort of labor in place and crop diversity and livestock diversity, and the cultural stewards of those crops for many years. And he and I met in Virginia at a conference on biodiversity, and his uncle, who's anyway, he's not a founder of Pixar, but he lives on the West Coast, and he's Eben Fisk Otsby, who's here. And he, had complicated memories of this place, this very storied place. And they were in a canoe ride, and you can hear Bennett talk about it quite beautifully. And he offered it to Bennett, and he's like, I want to release this because it comes with a lot, it's heavy. And Bennett said, no, he's I don't want it. And then a few minutes later, he said, yes, I'm going to take it, and I'm going to open it. I'm going to work with you to like change what this place is. And so that was, and so that's kind of where a little bit after that is where I enter the story, because there are so many stories that are in the ground here. And I just want to locate it for a second. So it's a Sylvester Manor. It was a provisioning plantation, meaning they grew up mostly like hogs and sheep for salt pork and mutton to go to Barbados, which is where the Constant Plantation was. And that's kind of the reason why Sylvester Manor existed. They had a massive sugar plantation in Barbados. And so the English, I don't know if you can see this here. So it's just a very classic like triangular trade, an example of that. And the family was quite, I guess, in air quotes, smart. They bypassed, the Bay of New York to go out to, sorry, I'm having trouble with this, to go out to Gardiner's Bay. It was just a lot easier for them to avoid taxes and many things, and kind of getting back and forth in this kind of dark trade. And really quickly, the Sharp Song Cropover was physically composed of two parts. It was an ensemble of large cane knife instruments, idiophones made of steel that visitors to the manor could play, and then a bagasse seed pattern labyrinth. And bagasse is kind of the residual fiber that's left over after pressing sugarcane. And the cane knives of Sharp Song Cropover had sort of a twofold conception. They were kind of an homage to the machete, right? The simple, really universal farm tool. And, cane was one of the last crops to be harvested mechanically. And it was about this new kind of field song, one radiating from field tools, because the manor was being transformed into an art center and a musical venue. And there is a soundscape, because I had spent time doing fieldwork in Louisiana and sugar plantations. There's a soundscape to cutting that's mechanized now, but I was working with some heirloom crop varietals, and so I wanted to focus on that. And there's also sort of a kind of choreography to your body. It sounds poetic and romantic, and it wasn't. It was very violent and kind of awful work, but there is a way in which your body sort of moves to cut the canes. And so this was a way, in a material way, to kind of an exercise in telling some of the sort of honest and difficult, sort of messy stories about New York's agricultural history. And then, of course, the labyrinth was, cane fields are labyrinthine, and absolutely. And Cropover, part of the installation's title, refers to a really old Bajan, Barbadian laborers festival celebrating the end of the sugarcane harvest. And it's been held in Barbados since the 1780s. And it's one of our few carnivals in the summer in the Caribbean. And, they still have the, pick of the crop monarch, and there's a ceremony of the last delivery of the last canes. And so it was really this way to kind of, my proposal and kind of work developing this installation was really about kind of this messy place of the past is present, the present is past. But back to how the narrative is presented, this is something that is produced by the manor, and I want to share it with you.
Like so many historic properties, experience at the Sylvester Manor Gardens over time depended on who you were and when you were. Over 4 centuries, the stories of the manor and the garden have been interwoven. They have been a place of labor and struggle, of contemplation and repose, a place of production, cultivation, growth, death, and rebirth. Today at the Manor, we're working to understand more and more stories of the people who have inhabited this place. The gardens are open for all to explore. We invite you to experience the joyful rebirth of a new season here at Sylvester Manor.
So that's a really beautiful piece, and it was produced kind of maybe while I was still working with them, or maybe a little bit afterwards. But I introduce it because I think nostalgia can be kind of insidious. When people, and I think this is done really well. I want to say that. And when I opened this conversation into this project, which will be short, but I really meant it wholeheartedly that we all hold contradictions, and that there is a way in which this kind of work for social change is really complex, and that there are people moving forward in good directions in a very complicated space who feel a sense of rootedness, and it's anyway there, and it's very hard. When people feel nostalgic for slave plantations and have weddings and parties there, as is the case here, those activities and stories have a deadening effect on the current manifestations of racism. Because nostalgia reimagines space in an abstract way, and it romanticizes something that's complex, and it removes voices from narratives, and it really unroots the history of a lot of people. And so in my installation, I wanted to sort of include more roots, make that evocative, that say that this is not so much just a place of beauty, rather it's really a place of complicated beauty. And so one of the points of departure into kind of telling these stories was through archaeology, and it's nice to be in this context. This was before my time with USI. My entry point into this kind of work was through archaeology and material culture. This is not my project that I was on, but these are soil pits from the original excavations which uncovered the remains of several buildings that date to the early history of the manor, as well as a large pit that contained the remains of 13 large pigs that were completely butchered. They were deposited sometime between 1650 and 1670. And kind of think that they represented a large shipment of salt pork to either the Constant or Carmichael plantations, which were the Sylvester family's plantations on Barbados. And so, archaeologists want to understand how cultures change and how artifacts relate to organizing principles that tie a whole society together, and how kind of over time these organizing principles shift. And so this opened up a space, certainly for Bennett and Sarah Gordon, who was the creative director at the time, who I worked with, and the interim executive director, and they were really open to kind of understanding and complicating the narrative that was, being told in the manor house every day, especially on the weekends, several times a day. And this is a wonderful Matt Griswold, who's from Texas, done a lot of work, in Virginia as well as here. And sorry for the poor image quality. She wrote this book that eventually became about, with the subtitle, 3 Centuries at a Slave Plantation on Long Island. And so it came out, I think I was already working on the installation, and I guess to say that, there is still, even as I was kind of working on a project, there's still a kind of way in which there are certain people who can tell the stories, the difficult stories. And it's not in a Goebbels kind of way of control of the narrative. It's not, as dark as that, but that is the case. And this is the manor house. And this is, I think, the head of current head of the farms. And this is kind of what most people who go to the manor house want. They want to rest in this place of kind of comfort and leisure, and it's pretty, and there are layers of history, and you kind of imagine yourself as part of the aristocracy, and this kind of thing. And it's a beautiful, generative place where they have woofers from all over the world who come and really do work the land, and they have wonderful CSAs, and yet, like, that's, I don't know that is a whole history, kind of like what RL was saying. This is about kind of knowledge propagation and what we can do. And I just realizing and revisiting this project how what I was trying to connect with my experience in the Bayesian community here in Brooklyn was just didn't fit into this. This is Bennett and his wife. They're both musicians, really amazing people, very open. I stayed at the house overnight with my own family, and he turned into kind of a bluegrass destination for bluegrass music, and it was very special and alive, and it really, I think, healed the land. I mean, there are acknowledgments of, the contradictions, right? They're Quakers. I mean, the burial grounds of the Quakers next to those of the enslaved Blacks, African, and Native Long Islanders here. And then this is also part of it, right? This is Crop Over Festival in Barbados. And this is happening now. It's also had the same trajectory, and how do maybe we can talk about this, like how, there's a way in which, there's studies of Calypso and people done PhDs on it and soca, and, there's a way in which we kind of own and kind of appropriate different narratives to kind of for liberation and release. Anyway, sorry, I think my family's coming in. Okay, I'm on my call, right? Sorry about that. And I move more quickly now. Really interested in cartography and mapping. So I looked at the depths in the bay. And I would say, without trying to sell the project short, it ultimately became these really kind of beautiful printed pieces instead of the installation that we passed out. Within the back of these were narratives of the connection between crop over in Barbados, about tools of harvest, about Sylvester Manor, and about kind of what we could do musically with this installation. So this is kind of from my studio. I did a kind of study of, I'm not a musician, but I researched, forms and materials to determine kind of design options for cane knife instruments. Looked at, chimes and weather activated instruments, and this world of manufacturing sound, how to construct a resonating chamber. And I decided that I just wanted to create a kind of crude instrument that would alter sound, but not to any kind of technically accurate scale. And they kind of remain tools of the field. And so studio shot, and just again, just playing around. And we had funding for this, the Cumberland Packing Company and Taste and Cultures Foundation, people involved in sugar industry right now, supported this work. And so we got to a place where it's really kind of, I guess, as an artist, doing this project, we were researching a lot of things. The castings were all going to be for the poles. They were cast from sugar canes, and then you have all these different presentations of it. We went on, got some sites selected behind the manor house, at the children's garden. The labyrinth we were able to do with bagasse, which is really nice because it's a seed pattern labyrinth, which can be done collaboratively. And this is from my time in Louisiana with the canes. I mean, it's, they're full of rats and snakes, and, they attract bees once you start cutting them, and it's complicated. And I realize I'm probably going over, so I'm gonna go quickly through these slides. Just to say again, like past is present, present is past. These are folks working on some of the heirloom, small plots of heirloom cane. And cane is still a very intense, labor intensive crop, right? These trucks run. This is when I was in Patsouville and Jeanneret in Sugar City. And it's just, I'm going back and forth from these slides. It's like 24 hours a day. Like the cane mills don't stop. They just taking cane through and through. And the mills are, you know, it's all steam run, and it's all the, you know, the sugar, and there's this film on everything. And so it's just trying to get a way of kind of how this crop and how this labor and work on this, yeah, kind of, it just kind of penetrates everything. Again, mechanized, it's still quite dangerous work. Again, just shifting to offer some context. The life that kind of comes when after the crop is cut and over, exposes a lot of the, you know, soil microbiomes and biota. That's our, where the sugar is processed now, to give you a sense of scale. And I'm, yeah, running through a lot of things. We can talk more later. And then this should work. I think maybe it's not working. Oh, I don't think it's working right now. But if anyone wants to guess which children's toy is made of sugar, it's my little joke. It's they're Legos. I wish this worked. This is not quite working right now, but made from bagasse. And this is just an image from Crop Over. And the theme this year was kind of COVID, and just kind of we can talk more about tradition and past and present. And that's it. I'll just end it there.